everybody. Welcome to the Data Science Hangout. I'm sure we'll have quite a few people joining in and in the next few minutes here too. But if you're joining for the first time, it's great to meet you. I'm Rachel. If this is your first Hangout, this is an open space for the whole data science community to connect and chat about data science leadership, questions you're facing, and what's really going on in the world of data science. These sessions are recorded and shared to YouTube as well as the RStudio Data Science Hangout site. So you can always go back and rewatch to find helpful resources or share with others. I'll say this up front because I always forget this. We also have a LinkedIn group for the Hangout too. So if you ever want to continue a certain discussion or see a brief summary of a topic brought up each week, you can join that group. I'll share it in just a second so I don't pause here. But we always want to create spaces where everybody can participate and we can hear from everyone. So there's 3 ways you can ask questions today. You can jump in by raising your hand on Zoom and I'll just call on you. You can put questions in the Zoom chat and feel free to just put a little star next to it if you want me to read it out loud instead, or I can call on you to introduce yourself and ask. But we also have a Slido link that Hannah will share in just a second here in the chat where you can ask questions anonymously too. So this is all for you and all the questions are audience led. So just like to reiterate, we love to hear from everyone, no matter your level of experience or area of work. But today I'm so happy to be joined by my co-host, Travis Gerke. Travis is Director of Data Science at the Prostate Cancer Clinical Trials Consortium. That's a hard one to say. But Travis, I'd love to turn it over to you and have you just introduce yourself and maybe share a little bit about the work that you do.
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Travis. Thanks so much for having me. This is really great. I've been on a couple Hangouts and they're always fun. So right, as Rachel said, I'm Director of Data Science at the Prostate Cancer Clinical Trials Consortium, which, yes, it is a mouthful, and the acronym might be even more tricky, PCCTC. Try saying that 5 times fast. But whatever the case may be, we're a CRO, so a clinical research organization, meaning that we facilitate the work of clinical trials from end to end for often pharmaceutical sponsors or sometimes so-called independent investigator-initiated trials, which will be maybe physician scientists who've initiated a trial at their site, at their hospital. And we're sort of a boutique CRO in the sense that we mostly do prostate cancer oncology work. So right now we're running about a quarter of all early phase clinical trials in late stage prostate cancer in the US. And we have a few global studies as well. So it's good. We do, as I said, we kind of collect all the data at the sites. We help the sites launch the trial. And then once the data starts rolling in, that's when the data science team takes over. They do a lot of counting, a lot of tabling, make figures. We use our Markdown. Something that we're excited to do is move the clinical trials reporting space more towards R, Python, other open source technologies over traditionally a license-dominated space such as SaaS and things like that. Of course, we're not the only kind of thought leaders in the space. There's a lot of great work from GSK, Roche, and Taurus and others that we keep tabs on, and we love to learn from you all as we go.
Awesome, thank you. And so I know a lot of people have commented in the chat already about your amazing background and wanting to know, where are you right now?
I'm seeing the guesses you're coming. Glacier National Park. Like I feel like I've become Bigfoot these days. There was someone on Twitter recently who said, "Did I just have a Travis Gerke sighting?" No, I'm not in Glacier anymore. We're now in Washington State. I'm on a river called the Nisqually, which is just outside of Olympia, near Seattle.
Awesome. So I guess that's a good transition. No, I was just going to say, I feel like that's a great transition into, I hinted at we would chat a little bit about very remote work and would love to learn a little bit more about your travels and working remotely.
Yeah, this is something kind of wild that we did. So my wife and we have 2 kids, they're 7 and 8, and a dog. We used to live in Florida, and then we were never fans of the heat. And then for that and reasons. We just said, let's leave. So we sold our home and we bought an RV and a truck and sold most of our stuff. And now we live full time in an RV, and I just do data science from wherever we are. Lately, it's been on the Pacific Northwest, but it's great. I'm happy to answer any odd questions you might have about that. 100 out of 10 recommend it. If anyone has the urge to just get up and move, it's very pandemic friendly. We don't see many people often. Although when we want to go to the city, we can. We went to Seattle yesterday. It was fun. So, but yeah, that's one of the good things about data science. It's pretty flexible. You can do it from anywhere, really.
That's amazing. I see, Livy, you asked a question somewhere a bit earlier about internet. Do you want to jump in?
Hey, Livy.
Yeah. Hey, Travis and I were talking about this on LinkedIn a little bit. I was like, you're going to spill all your secrets about how you have internet in all these places, right? Because my husband and I both work remotely, and we both feel like the internet is like a utility for us now. It's like a boundary to working. So I'd love to know more about like how you stay connected all over the place, and if you have any
Absolutely.
trouble.
Yeah, no, I've shockingly actually not had any trouble yet. I geeked out on this big time before we did this, because you're right. Without internet, I can't do much in terms of work. But even in the remotest places we've been, I think Big Bend in Texas, we were the furthest from civilization. I was still able to maintain Zoom meetings, much to my surprise. Actually, I prepped for it a little bit. On a week like that where I'm pretty remote, I make sure to set up a lot of kind of, maybe it's a learning week or kind of heads down work. It's actually kind of good. It gives you a little bit of space from the usual grind of just Zoom to Zoom. But even in that case, it wasn't necessary. So today I'm using this hotspot. So these hotspots, this one's the 5G Netgear. I can always share details about these things, but this one, so I have redundant phone plans for this sort of thing. This one today I'm on AT&T. This hotspot also runs a T-Mobile, but I have I also have Verizon plans for. It just depends. It depends where we are, what kind of service is going to give us the best. But I've actually never had a challenge streaming videos, Zoom, things like that. Something else that's helpful, if you get a hotspot, these little boosters. This is like $20 on Amazon. They can be tremendously helpful. They kind of like funnel the signal into your hotspot a little bit better. There's one, and if you want to really geek out on this like I did, the best resources website called rvmobileinternet.com. And you can check that out. These days, I think if I even had like a proper home, I might consider doing this instead of proper like cable or whatever internet, because the price is pretty similar, and often I have better signal, much to my amusement, than my kind of at-home colleagues that I'm Zooming with. So yeah, it works well. It's fun. Did that answer your question? I could really, you can tell I could talk about that for days, but
yeah, no,
I love it.
it did. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to pass some of this along to my sister. My sister lived in a van. Her and her husband lived in a van for about 10 years.
nice.
And they've just recently settled down into a tiny home, but they are still really far from everything. So it's been a little bit of a struggle.
Very cool.
I love Raha's comment in the chat that this is exactly the kind of conversation I've been craving. Aaron, I see you asked a question too. Do you want to jump in?
Hi, yeah, this is Aaron. I was just wondering, because I've tried to work in places where there's lots of sunlight before, and I found it's really hard to, even if the sun isn't shining directly on you, if there's any sun on touching anything in the background behind you, it's hard to keep the glare off the screen. So I was wondering if you just had tips for us.
I wish I had a brilliant thing to suggest, and maybe others will. For today, I kind of just wandered around until I found a shady spot. So I'm kind of like in the shade, and then and I'm actually letting just my MacBook Pro do all the work. I'm even using the onboard camera. I mean, I do have like a stream cam that sometimes I use, but most times I find this is okay. I'm sorry if that's a disappointing answer.
No, thank you.
Yep.
I'm wishing I was wandering around outside, like looking for a nice place to sit. I should just take the hangout outside next time. I see, Mike, that you asked a question in the chat. You want to jump in?
Hi, thanks for discussing this, Travis. I hope you don't mind that we're talking about, your work lifestyle rather than
Good.
data science or anything
No,
complicated.
it's a hangout. That's what we're
Yeah,
here
sure.
for.
So I work remote from the most of my team. They're predominantly US based. And classic situation here in the UK today is a public holiday because of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Last Monday was a US public holiday. So, you know, my colleagues are hitting me up on my public holiday, but I wasn't allowed to hit them up on their public holiday. But when you're out and about, how do your colleagues kind of, how do you balance up, you know, time at work versus, you know, time I can be available for conversations, and how do you have those conversations with colleagues to say, look, you know, I'm going to be busy or traveling between here and here, you know, so don't expect an answer in that time period.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it is always, I mean, it's something that one has to be very intentional about and just communicate broadly. I do work very odd hours, especially now that I'm on West Coast. Most of my colleagues are on East Coast time.
Right.
So I do try mostly to wake up very early and stick to their schedule, but a lot of times it doesn't work out. And that's fine. I'm kind of a night owl by nature anyway. So I will fire off emails at what is going to be like 2 a.m. Eastern. And what I do make sure to communicate is that, you know, if I'm sending an email at 2 a.m., like it doesn't mean I expect anyone to see or respond or do anything with that email at 2 a.m.
Right.
Nor does it mean that I've been working from like 9 a.m. Eastern to 2 a.m. Eastern. Like it's just, you know, the async. I think, I mean, that's really the future of most work environments for data science, I would suppose. I think someone like Chris Hurd on Twitter probably has stronger words than I do about that, but which I would recommend as a follow for remote work hot takes. But yeah, I mean, it's just it's really comes down to communication. I let people know if I'm gonna be traveling and, you know, blocking time on my calendar, things like that. Because some afternoons we do need to move or make a drive or something like that, and, you know, I just set it as busy, and then people know that I'm not there, and just let them know.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I think blocking calendars is the key, right? Because that says, you know, don't expect an answer in this 3-hour period or whatever.
Yep, for sure.
Thanks.
I like that point though about you might answer at 2, but that doesn't mean you're expecting somebody to answer you right away too.
It's when people answer back and you get into a conversation at 2
Yeah.
that's the tricky bit.
Yeah, that's
I know
right.
Katie from our team used to put something in her email signature, like I send emails at off times, but that doesn't mean I expect a response.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
Oh, I think Sam, I think you just actually shared that in the chat too.
Yeah, we use that tagline a lot at my last job. In fact, our president had it on his email. I'm working a remote schedule. I don't expect an answer back, and I'm flexible. Mike, to your comment, I had the same situation. So when I lived in Bermuda, you had a choice. You either got Bermuda holidays or you got a US holidays, and every employee made a choice, and they are different. And the key was just like to let everybody, you know, you just had to communicate to people, hey, this is your holiday, I know it, and, you know, this is my holiday, and, you know, we'll work around it. And fortunately, like, it's the oddballs where you run into trouble. Like I would say, like today, the Jubilee is going on, and we just had Memorial Day in the United States, but the summers tend to be okay. And like in Bermuda, they had cricket holiday on August 1st and 2nd. The entire island shut down for 2 days, so the North could play the South in cricket. And, you know, that was one of the things. It's like an odd days, but it's the summer, so it's not as bad. But it's just really about communications and expectations. You just got to set them and expect people to live by them.
Definitely. I see, Robert, you had a question in the chat you want to ask live?
Sure, yeah. On async work, like, I guess being productive with others, especially when conversations get complex, maybe there is no good tool other than a meeting or a call, like email versus Slack versus Miro. Like, are there any async tools that you like to actually work through something complicated and make decisions without the meeting?
That's such a good. I'd love to learn from others on this one myself. I will say what we do. I mean, we try to lean into GitHub whenever we can. You know, I think the process of writing down where you're stuck and like here's my reprex or what I'm doing. How do we solve it? Like that's good. When working with non-technical, I mean, like, non-data scientist, you're right. Sometimes you just got to resort to the meeting, and that's fine. It can be a lot more efficient that way, but the drawback there is you don't end up documenting. I think a lot of us have learned in the last couple of years with the remote setups that really just the writing things down reduces those institutional knowledge silos, where you can never pick up if someone leaves and go somewhere else and you go, oh my God, we don't know how to do this anymore. Instead of the meetings, whenever possible, writing things down is really wise. But as far as tooling, another one I wish I had a good answer for, like, oh, we use this consolidated approach with this thing, but no, we're kind of spattered all over the place. We have some Slack, some Teams, some GitHub, emails. Yeah, I don't know. I was interacting with someone on Twitter recently about Loom, and that looks awesome. Sort of sharing it. So Loom is a platform for sharing quick little videos, screen shares with, like, I think it has like a little headshot of you talking in it or something like that. And it seems like a really great solution for asking and answering technical questions in a streamlined way, but I have not used it myself. Curious if others have recommendations there.
Hannah, I see you said Loom is great. I love to hear what that is.
Yeah, so I've used it before for async work, especially with project kickoffs when you can set context really easily with a short video. You can reduce meetings, get everyone on the same page, and then have everyone kind of digest all the information before you meet for more technical work. So I found that's really important whenever you're kicking off projects. Also for updates that you maybe would have a weekly sync on. Sometimes you can just do it in 4 minutes over a Loom video. And then if there are any follow-up questions, someone could send you a Loom video right back. So I love it. Yeah.
Does anyone else have other tools that have been useful? I see a few being shared in the chat right now too.
Oh, Slack does the video messages, I see. Maddie said, that's awesome. I didn't know that. Huh.
Alexander, I see you asked a question. Well, as we're sticking on this remote work topic right now, do you want to jump in?
Hi, yeah, Travis, thanks for speaking with us today. I wanted to ask you about your ability to work remotely. So is this something that you've always done, or is it something that became possible because of the pandemic? And I'm also wondering, I always hear a lot about how there's a lot of new roles that are opening that are remote, but I'm still curious, is this like, are people hiring with remote roles in mind for data science, or is this still something that needs to be like negotiated like pretty intensely in order to have, because I know there's a lot of talk now about return to work, and a lot of CEOs are saying people need to come back. So I'm just curious how this became possible for you, and if you have any insight into what it maybe looks like now in the market.
Yeah, sure. So for like a couple things there, that awesome question. I love it. The return to work phrase is like usually a hot button phrase with huge remote proponents. So it implies sort of that we weren't working before. Yeah, like when we aren't in the office. I know that's not what you meant, but it's just sort of a funny thing that it struck me. But yeah, I think if it in the negotiation stage, which you mentioned, so if you're looking at a role and it turns into a company or an org saying, well, we're going to let you work remote, as if it's some sort of privilege, it could be a red flag if remote really is your intention and your desired mode of working. And if you work well that way, it's just the way you work. I mean, I don't think it's a privilege or not. It's the way that you're productive. And if orgs don't see it that way, then maybe that's kind of an early indicator. So it's an important conversation to have early on, like when we're interviewing new people for our team, we make sure to say like our org is 100% remote. And indeed for us, and even for me, the 100% remote, like going way remote, only became possible because of the pandemic. So kind of one of the few bright points of the pandemic, it allowed us to say, we really can do this from anywhere at any time. But now that we've done that and it's successful, and there are of course cost benefits to not having brick and mortar, all those things, it makes sense for us. So we say, like, our intention is to stay 100% remote. and that's what this role is. And then there's no kind of like, we're gifting you this benefit. It is just the way it is. Because people are, I mean, a lot of studies I think lately are showing that people even became more productive when they work remotely, which makes a lot of sense to me. I know I did too. I don't waste 2 hours a day sitting in a car and, you know, putting on
Yeah,
proper pants or whatever the case may be. Yeah.
yeah, I definitely I definitely meant return to office, not return
Yeah, I
to
know.
work.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. No, no, no.
I
I didn't mean to sound accused. No,
yeah, yeah.
like I know exactly what you meant. I didn't sense any like ill will there. Yeah.
But I definitely think you're right. I think that this pandemic has definitely shown that there are some things for data scientists that are just, I've personally found easier to do at home than in the office. And I think this conversation we're having today is really bringing up important points about maybe some of the challenges with remote work. I know we're talking about Loom and how that can be really helpful. I find another thing that still maybe I find more helpful in the office is brainstorming. And the main reason is because of whiteboarding. It's really hard to whiteboard over Zoom and like brainstorm those ideas. So thanks for having this conversation and for sharing your insights.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for the questions.
I see there's an anonymous question that came in a bit earlier, which is shifting gears a little bit. But in simple terms, what is the difference between early phase and late stage clinical trials? What's the difference in the work there?
Oh yeah. Sorry if I started with jargon. This whole thing, that was not what I meant to do. So the clinical trials as a whole, you have phase 1, 2, 3, and sometimes 4. So phase 1 and 2 are kind of early investigational studies where you're looking at a new drug and you want to know, is it safe, and do we have any hints that it's going to be effective for a particular disease or patient population. And then later stage trials, or phase stage, the 3, 4. So 3 is the classic randomized controlled trial where you're saying, we believe it's safe, we believe it's effective, let's prove it. And then a 4 is usually a very large population wide. You kind of surveil the like lots of people are taking statins these days. You could run a phase 4 of something like a statin and make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do and that it's still safe. And in larger populations, sometimes even harder to reach aspects of the population that might not have enrolled in the classic phase 3 RCT. And then I was referring to late stage prostate cancer. Prostate cancer is a disease in which a lot of men are diagnosed very early on, so an early stage of disease. And the kind of actions you would take clinically for early stage prostate cancer are very different than those you would take for late stage prostate cancer, which is most often metastasized to the bone or other places. So we mostly operate in the late stage phase with metastatic disease, kind of low life expectancy, and a real opportune time to introduce new drugs that are helpful.
Thank you, Travis. That's really helpful.
Sure.
A few other questions in the chat coming in right now too. And I see, Sam, you asked one and you put a little star for me to read it. So a reminder, if you maybe are somewhere that's a bit loud or you want me to read a question, feel free to put a star next to it in the chat too. But it was, how do you convince leadership in pharma companies that are still hesitant or resistant toward remote work that it's the future for data science?
Oh, that's like the $1 million question, I guess. I suppose I've been fortunate not to be in that role. I've had to make that. I've not been in a position where I've had to make that argument myself. So I'm gonna cast an I don't know into the into the chat. If anyone has suggestions, I'm really interested to hear them. I read a lot of blogs and a lot of kind of like Twitter takes on this. And like some of the hot takes are just sort of like, well, I'll leave, we'll all leave and go get remote jobs that make more money. And I mean, like, sure, but if you like the work you're doing in the place you're working, that's probably not the best solution. If you'd like to, have a civil, productive conversation.
Has anyone
Probably,
had to make this case or wanted?
yeah, that'd be
wanna
great if
jump in?
someone has a suggestion or experience.
So in my experience, kind of in a previous role, we did have a group that were working together in one location. And in that sense, there were certain individuals, this is pre-pandemic, but certain individuals kind of, in order to get work-life balance and right, and kind of get that in place where they were having to commute a fair distance and take kids to school, and so their work day was kind of difficult because of all of that. They were trying to make the point that perhaps it would be more productive for them to be at home certain days in the week, so that they could then get the kids off to school, do a full day's work, go back, pick them up, and deal with everything. The line manager at the time was kind of saying, well, because they wanted to keep a cohesive group present in that location, if individuals were kind of off working in remote locations, that was harder. I can kind of understand that rationale just in terms of a group dynamic and the kind of over the coffee pot, round the kettle kind of discussions that you occasionally have with colleagues, or, you just turn around in your chair and ask questions. That's much harder when everyone's remote. So I kind of understood that point of view. I think, well, just before the pandemic, I made the case to work remote, and my manager at the time was like, sure, you're on the phone 90% of the time to folks in a remote location, so why should it matter where you work? And then the pandemic happened, and as far as I'm aware, I don't think that productivity has markedly dropped within my organization in the last 2 years. So I think it's a much stronger lever now to say, hey, look, we can do this remotely. Sure, there are some jobs that are more tricky, or certain circumstances that are, maybe you need to have closer interactions with colleagues. Like if someone is brand new into the industry from graduating, you maybe want to have closer interactions with them to make sure that they're getting it and they're not kind of, veering off the path too much. Let's call it that. But I honestly think that once you kind of get to a level of knowing what you're doing in your job, I can't see why anyone could have a strong argument that you have to be in the office.
Yeah, that's a great. I love that story in that you're pushing for it pre-pandemic, and then I think for a lot of places, the pandemic just was the proof that said, look, we really can do this, and like what it's almost like the onus is now on the in-office people. Like, well, show me how productivity increases when we're in the office, because we've proved it, like in the most dire of circumstances, like in a time when we shouldn't have been productive. I mean, that's the thing. The COVID enforced remote style of remote work is not normal remote work. That's not the way that it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be more of a choice and an intentional thought process rather than an emergency knee-jerk reaction. So that we did so many companies did so well remotely in the worst of situations means that they'll do even better in normal times.
I mean, I have to say that I think communication is much more difficult. You have to be intentional about communication. And also I think that it's easy for individuals to feel isolated. And that's got a knock-on effect on mental health and everything else. So, there are pros and cons for sure. But I think having those honest discussions about them is good first step.
Yeah, totally agree. Something I meant to mention about remote work in general, I learned a lot from the GitLab suite of resources. They have so much out there. They have a really good Coursera course. I think it's called Remote Team Management or something like this, which is very good. And then they have a remote team handbook, which speaks to a lot of those topics. They always say the biggest challenge is communication, and document everything, but that's really hard, and how do you carve time for it and make sure it's done, and how do we balance just kind of connectedness in the long run. Certainly things to think about and be intentional about. Oh, I saw it. Yeah, that's the one. Remote team management. Yeah,
that's the right one. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I know on this topic as well, Ethan, you just put a a comment and question around like staying connected to your coworkers. Do you want to jump in and add some context?
Yeah, I was just wondering kind of what Mike mentioned, I think, about people feeling more isolated. I know I've felt much more isolated. I've worked now at 2 companies, neither of which was big on remote before the pandemic, and maybe haven't put a lot of thought into like doing remote well. One of them, the one I'm with now, hired me on fully remote, which is wonderful. But I definitely miss more of the interactions with coworkers in person. But they're all in Ohio. I'm in Mississippi, so we can't like just meet up. And I'm just wondering what other people have seen that has worked for helping you stay connected.
Do any of
see
you all
Harsh.
work? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
I was wondering if any of you all work at the companies that have done the remote, like if you're a fully remote company, something that's become hip maybe these days is like the retreat sort of idea, where you just go like pick a place in the country or somewhere else and just go. We haven't done that at our org. We've talked about it a couple times, but I'm curious if anyone's done that and if it was awesome.
Yeah, I see a few hands raised. If you have maybe suggestions or ideas for this question. Harsh, I saw your hand raised first. If you want to jump in.
Actually, I want to say like a remote job is good. I completely agree with Mike also, because I have done remote job also and work from office. So both experience I am having. When I was a fresher, pass out from the college, then the remote job was quite very complicated, I will be honest, because I don't have any experience how the IT industry works or what is the domain they are working. So in sitting in an isolated room and in the front of computer for 9 hours, it's like become frustrating. Your line manager is telling you like, do this by that way. Like that is quite fast for a beginner in the industry. But in the office environment, the most important, I think, I love is that interaction with the people. You are hanging out, you're working. If you have a problem, then you are referring, hey, how do you do that? He will tell you it's so simple way. But in remote, because at present I'm working remote as well as office. My team is like in 3 or 4 nations: Australia, UK, Abu Dhabi, and India. Like my 11 team members are divided into the 4 nations. So we are handling the project of stock market domain. So the interaction is quite good, but sometimes it's quite complicated also, because first of all, the language barrier is not there, but pronunciation barrier comes around. How you're understanding your mate, like, because you don't see their facial expression, you are just hearing your voice, you have never met them. And like, so I would suggest that working from office is much and much easier and interactive, funny, and like 9 to 6 hour, my work time goes like so fast that I can't believe that. And 9 to 6 hour in the front of laptop in my home is like a 24-hour job, it looks like. But for a family person,
I do feel you on the
yeah.
I hear you on, sometimes it's hard to know like someone's sense of humor or when you're just like Slack messaging with them. But thank you so much. Sam, I see you had your hand raised too, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I actually a couple weeks ago got back from a retreat with my company. We're fully remote. We got about 40 to 50 employees, and it was really fun. There was a little bit of work, you know, sort of during the day, but then, you know, like in the afternoon, we like did a scavenger hunt around the city, and or we did, I mean, all sorts of just silly little activities. And they were like, you could go to this mall, or you can go, you know, to this museum or whatever. There were just all sorts of fun activities. And then in the evenings, of course, there were dinner and drinks, and everybody went out after the dinner and the drinks and had more drinks. And so it was a very fun time. And it was really fun getting to see everybody. But unfortunately, it was a COVID super spreader event.
Oh, geez.
But I was boosted, so I'm good. But yeah,
Yeah,
it was fun. I would love to chat more about it offline if anybody is interested.
Yeah, that's really
That
cool.
sounds
though.
great, minus the COVID part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I saw
Um,
someone actually mention something that I also do from time to time, where there's this you can co-work with your, like in a Zoom or any kind of Teams meeting, even silently, especially with the onboarding process. I find that's really helpful, so that the person or people know that I'm there and available. Like I have things to do, so I mean, I'll just sometimes even turn off our camera and just like go on mute, and then if you want to like pop on and say, oh, I got this thing, I'm stuck, I got a question. It works really well. You can block an hour or two with certain colleagues do that from time to time. It's kind of like working side by side.
That's a good idea. Okay, there's a few other questions that were on Slido anonymously that are on a different topic. And one was, does Python have as big of a place as R in clinical trials?
I haven't seen it yet. I could be totally blindsided by something that I'm just not aware of. But I think the reason is that R was traditionally built and is more maintained in the classical statistical space, and there's not too much NLAI, which of course is a Python strong point, going on in the traditional clinical trial world. So just the strength in terms of you're going to run a regression or a survival analysis and you're going to get exactly what you're going to get, and it's correct. I think that's sort of accepted as a more as a truth, compared to Python. And this is not a slight towards Python. Like it just, I just think it's the different way that these languages have evolved.
Thank you. Trying to go through a few other questions I saw from earlier. I think Javier, you asked a question around like commenting in your code. Would you want to jump in and ask that one?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm unique to this, because now at Bloomreach, the company I'm working at now, our team is much smaller. So over the last few years, I don't know if it's COVID related or not, but I have been putting, a lot less comments in my code. I think part of that too is like our teams have just sort of matured. So there's less of a need to comment stuff that, is like clearly obvious what's going on, Do you have any advice for like when to draw the line of I should comment or put some prose in my code here or not?
So I'm guilty of this. I've definitely written like some code, especially when I started the data science team that I'm leading now at this org. So when it was initiated, it was just me like writing a ton of code, and I didn't always comment that well, which was not wise for future me, and certainly not wise for other people that would be joining the team. What's been helpful is I work, for example, with Shannon Pileggi, who's awesome at communicating with me. This was hard to read. So I honestly lean on others to tell me what that line should be. It's something that I think it was Allison Hill might have mentioned or taught me about this, which is like almost like a feelings journal for how you're experiencing a set of code. Like when you open up the R document, if you just kept like an informal side document, which is when I saw this line, I felt happy because it was well commented, or I felt like, what is going on? Like those sorts of things, feedback from colleagues when they're, you do paired programming or code review is really, really helpful to me to know, like something that just might be clear to me because I've written the statement a million times is like not super clear without a comment.
That helps. Thanks.
Sure.
I like that feelings journal as you're going through it. Brittany, I saw you had asked a question in the chat earlier as well. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think for a lot of us who have had the more traditional in-office environment, and with remote work becoming more popular, you kind of get a grass is greener on the other side kind of feeling, and you're thinking maybe I do want to go fully remote. So I think I'd just love to ask the group, what are maybe some pros that we should consider, but also some maybe downsides or cons that someone should also consider before thinking about that switch from being maybe partially remote or fully in office to being fully remote?
A quick take from me would be a couple of I mean, the benefits to me are such that I'm here. So like, I'm clearly like a biased observer here, but of course, some of the challenges we've talked about are the communication and maybe potential isolation. I mean, that really is something that the team has to be so thoughtful about to make it work well and make sure that everyone's still engaged and feels like they're part of something that's meaningful and that everyone's growing. That's something I really try to keep tabs on in the team, that everyone, like, did you learn something this week, or how do you feel about your future and like next week, and not, because it's very easy, I think, in this potentially isolating environment to just have like be in the grind of like producing the thing, like, oh, you did your tables this week, great, like let's move on and we'll do more tables next week, or whatever the case may be. Just checking in about people, and making sure that they're balanced and happy is something, if it's possible to probe early on, like what if you can get a vibe. I'm sorry that there's not a more rigorous thing to look for than that, but that would be my 2 cents.
Thank you. Sam, I see you have your hand raised to add on to this too.
Yeah, so when I first switched to remote work, I was working for the federal government, and I hated it at first, because I had this nice little commute on the metro, and I would and go out to drinks and everything afterwards, and so I hated working from home. But now I love it, and I won't ever do a job that's not working from home again. I think my biggest piece of advice, if you are looking to switch to fully remote work, is to definitely get your like a workspace, like a total, and that's what you do in that space is you work. Because when I first started working, my workspace was also in my bedroom, and that was just like such a bad vibe generally. So yeah, definitely, if you want to make the switch, make sure you have a dedicated, and it doesn't have to be like a whole room. Like I happen to have an office right now, but I think as long as you have like a desk or something that's like a dedicated workspace, I think that's really important.
Totally endorse that one too. Yeah, sometimes when the weather's bad, like I feel it when I work in my room, like in the RV, which is, you can imagine, it's actually pretty small. That feels very crushing, like soul crushing. So I have a tent that I work in when the weather's not great, and I have like a little space heater that I'll put in it and things like that. And even just that simple walk from my RV to the tent is like, okay, I'm going to work now. And so yeah, I completely agree with you. Dedicated workspace is huge.
I agree as well. I had to move my desk out of my bedroom. That was just too much in one space. I see, Eric, you had a question earlier on commenting code. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, definitely. So I, like others have been saying in the chat, thinking of future you is quite important when you're commenting on code and the like. But one effort I did earlier this year is it's not just about the code for a specific project, it's how you're accessing certain environments, or maybe using reusable, code across projects, or just other kind of intangibles. I'm just curious how your team is approaching how you document and share your learning about, how you're accessing certain tools in your infrastructure, or how you're trying out new, ways of doing analysis, and how you're sharing that learning across, so that nobody's like trying to do it all themselves every time, and trying to avoid that syndrome.
Yeah, that's such an awesome question, and something that I worried about, not on this role, but in my last org too. How do we create like a wiki that is just, suppose you landed in like a data scientist role here tomorrow, like how would you know like what to do, where are the keys, what are you doing, like and I something I pursued in the past was like GitHub pages via Netlify, so making just like a simple like our markdown site, and putting that together. The limitation that I found there was then the people who can contribute knowledge to those pages are only those who know our markdown, and that's big because I want people who don't code to feel like they can come and comment on our processes and share their knowledge as well. So these days, as much as I'm reluctant to say it among the data science crowd, we're just using like SharePoint, which is fine. It's easy, it's lightweight, like it's kind of already licensed through our org, so it was free. But other suggestions, I mean, any other thing that people are using there would be, I'd love to learn about that as well. Just what's a low barrier to entry Wikipedia knowledge base kind of toolkit? I haven't stumbled on my favorite.
I can tell you that what I did earlier this year is I did do an R Markdown based site with Blogdown, but I found a theme where most of the content is just Markdown itself. It's not like I'm doing R specific Markdown syntax, and I was able to tie it with GitHub Actions so that somebody could go on a page, they would see a button that says edit this page. If they see something wrong or see an improvement, it would take them straight to GitHub in our org for that page. They could just edit it on the spot in GitHub itself and then put the pull request. I merge it in, then there's a GitHub action that redeploys it.
That's very cool. Yeah.
It took a lot of work to get there because infrastructure at big orgs is always a complicated mess sometimes. But once I got a little help from our IT group on setting up the deployment piece, I'm much happier with this solution than what I was doing in the past, which was in essence scattered files on a shared Linux like file system space that nobody could index or find or anything like that. So it's been helping future me at least.
Yep.
I see there's a few comments in the chat of tools people are using too. We recently moved over to Confluence, like very recently, but I still do find myself like searching Slack to find helpful links and stuff too. And it's just a habit of mine.
You find the experience with Confluence good? Like because I know I tried it and I felt like it was hard, even as a developer. Like it felt very developer friendly and less like real people. Is that your experience, or has it improved? I mean, that was years ago. I was like,
well, when I say we just moved over, it was like a week ago. So I'm not really sure yet, but I will let you know.
Cool. Okay.
I see Raha, you asked a question around code reviews too. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. So right now in my group, the only person coding is really me, but I'm going to start with I'm hiring a postdoc, and then we're going to bring on a bunch of undergrads. And I would like some sort of mutually beneficial relationship where I can give input on how their code could be structured better, but I also need to have them look at mine and all of the things I didn't comment that I should have. And I don't know what the best way to implement this would be, also taking into account that for some people, their code might be like, they might think of it as their property. Like they don't want to give it away to another student who would just recreate what they've done. So I want to protect them, but also make them better.
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is Garrick. I think I see Garrick here. Hey, you taught me about this, like pair programming strategies. Something that I found is hard for me is when someone says, "Can you review my code?" and then it's like points me to a GitHub repo, and then I don't know where to start, and it feels like a lot. Instead, pair programming strategies, whereby maybe one that Garrick was teaching me about is a driver passenger sort of setup where someone codes and someone else is kind of like the passenger and saying, what are you thinking now? Like, what are you doing next? And then you kind of iterate together through the code base in real time as you develop it potentially. So it's less a review like post-mortem and more of a like how do we think through and build, and that's really good for onboarding people too. But then that could also work for simple code review if it's already done. Just kind of like looking block by block, like have maybe the person who wrote the code could be the driver then, and then they go, okay, here's the first thing I was going to do. I open this file and then I was going to load this data, and here's my thought process. And then it kind of, I think it really speeds up the workflow instead of just like feeling lost when you land in a big code base, which is usually my experience.
Thank you. I see a few comments in the chat around pair programming too, and Brittany, I see you just asked a follow-up question there too, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, so I have the pleasure of being probably one of the very few, like handful, maybe two handfuls of people on my like 80, 90 person team who uses R. And so I noticed one of the challenges is if I wanted to do pair programming with someone, a lot of people actually don't know the language. So I don't know if it's just you have to find someone else who knows it and try to do it only with them, or if anybody has tips around what to do in that scenario.
That was actually how we stumbled on pair programming originally, Garrick and I, was that we were trying to onboard people who did not know R. So it certainly can work there. And you're right, it kind of limits, like you sort of, in many cases, need to be the driver if the person doesn't know any R whatsoever. But it can be valuable for kind of more entry-level tasks if that the learner is then the driver, and then you know, make clear that we have all the time in the world here. Like, it's okay to not know what to do next, and just, you know, like, lean on me when you need it. That works too. Oh, Garrick, hey, do you have other thoughts? You've done this more than me, so I feel like I'm just trying to channel you.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, just talk about pair programming and I will appear. This is awesome.
Good.
Yeah, I love it. I think one of my favorite parts about pair programming, and especially like if you have someone who's newer to a code base or newer to programming, be the driver. So they're the ones actually like typing and moving the mouse and everything. And then the person who knows more is the person, I don't know what the right words are. So maybe driver and pass, but like, so there's like a backseat driver is the person who knows more. And they're kind of saying like, okay, now, you know, go over here, go into this file, click this thing. And what I found is like, it really forces you to slow down and explain at a level that matches the person who is who's learning. And like, it can be really easy to just sort of like, you know, like be really easy to just sort of like brain dump, to be like, hey, let's have a meeting and like, here's how everything works. And like, you don't realize it's like, it's too much, you're overloading, it's going too quickly, you know, they don't have the right context, et cetera. But actually sort of moving through the code together and doing smaller tasks, like you realize you get a sense for, you know, what's the right pace by doing that. And that's one of my favorite parts of it.
Awesome. Thank you. I see, Zach, you had some thoughts on this too, if you want to jump in. Or I can read.
Yeah,
I can read yours. Oh.
Happy to. I was going to throw on the video, but I guess I found it that we schedule some time for basically everyone to be like the driver, and then have people kind of ask clarifying questions, or, you know, how did you approach this? And I always think, yeah, it's just kind of a fun activity. I would agree with Lizzie that it just like brings a different perspective to the way that you approach code. Yeah.
Cool.
That's great. Thank you. Any other thoughts on this topic before I shift gears? And I realize an hour is going by very quickly. There was a great question on Slido, asked anonymously, that was, when trying to start a data science department in a medium company, what would you say are some points to take into account? Like, also, are there any guidelines or books to check out?
I always recommend Emily Robinson and Jacqueline Nollis's book, Becoming a Data Scientist. Is that what it's called? Becoming a Data Scientist? From Manning Publishing. It's awesome. I read that when I wasn't looking for a job and I wasn't even building a department. I just devoured it because it was just so good. And then I find that I often return to it as I do new things, when I look for new roles, when I build a department. There's lots of good examples in there about big orgs, small orgs, what to expect. I do recall that there is a particular section in there where they interview someone who has started build a career in data science, who has started a data science division in an existing kind of smallish, medium-sized org. And I would point to that'll probably cover it more completely than I could try to here. I don't know. Yeah, that I'll probably leave it at that. I don't want to like say something that is not as good as the book. You should just go read the book.
I will say I need to go read that book too, because it is one of the most recommended resources at this Hangout.
It's so good. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And I know a few people, or Eric shared the podcast too, which is really great as well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Awesome. I want to make sure I haven't missed any questions through the chat. Sometimes I know it's hard when there's a lot of comments, but I love all the comments and conversation that happens in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand if you had asked a question earlier and I unfortunately missed it.
Can I unmute and ask a question?
Yeah.
I think I asked a question that several other people also like chimed in and asked a different version of, which was, you know, talking about your experience of being the only or the first data scientist and growing a team from there. I know that I have been avoiding roles where someone's like, you would be the only data scientist. And, you know, that's a scary thing to think about. How did you approach that?
Yeah. In hindsight, I kind of like won the lottery with regards to the org that I'm in. So the CEO who I report to is so supportive of like, we know data science is our need in our next direction. And so I was kind of given just like a lot of green room to run. If you're toying with the idea, I would suggest making sure that's the case. In larger orgs where maybe you don't have as close contact with, leaders, leadership that would make executive decisions around how much to invest, whether it's in people or in tooling. Sometimes the people, actually most often or always, the people are more important than the tooling, and data scientists aren't cheap. So making sure that if you're going to build a data science team, that everybody's like full, going into it with eyes wide open, that this is an investment and it's absolutely going to return the value. But brace yourself. So I mean, that's just making sure the buy-in is already there, rather than I think going into it and thinking that we're going to change the philosophy here. I think that's a much harder thing to do if you get the sense that maybe they're kind of happy enough with like the kind of Excel kingdom, and maybe they want to toy with the idea of like, let's tinker with some data science, and like everybody's got a data scientist these days, let's get one of those. That might be kind of a warning signal. Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Sure.
I love all the questions and energy this week. I see, Eric, you just asked a question in the chat too. You want to jump in?
Yeah. So going back to kind of your work in the clinical space with R, I'm just curious from your perspective, Travis, what are some of the kind of trends you're seeing in how R is being used and some more, you might say, innovative work in this space? I'm certainly seeing some. I'd love to hear your perspective on areas that you think are becoming quite hot in this space for doing some outside the box ideas or more innovative analyses.
I love, so yeah, that's an awesome question. And I love the kind of back to basics trend across all of data science. So like the SQL first tools being the new hotness that is actually the old hotness. And I think the way, tidyverse and dplyr, things like data manipulation and those environments are written is so readable. And I think that the move away from things like SAS. Not to say that SAS isn't readable; it's very readable for some people. But I think I'll go ahead and like put in my opinion that dplyr is more readable. And I think and Gerke is we've often pondered this together. We'll go, I wonder what would be the error rate if someone was just written strict SAS, like doing the same task. Someone who's very fluent in SAS, someone who's very fluent in dplyr, writing and code reviewing these two things. How error prone, like what would the error rate be in both scenarios, like some sort of A/B test with these two sorts of languages. And again, I'm not trying to get into a language war here. It's not really about that, but I think there are licensing advantages to moving away from SAS, and if we get readability advantages, less error prone code, more translation into SQL-based variations where we can leverage tools like dbt, which I know was on a previous Hangout. There was a little bit of discussion about that, for better data documentation, better data cataloging. I think we'll understand our sources better. And in the end, for us in life sciences, that's going to translate to better patient impacts because we're producing higher quality reports on higher quality data. We've definitely seen with our Markdown, we produce things for safety monitoring boards where they go, oh my goodness, like you just sent us this HTML document or this, PDF thing that is so elegantly readable, that in the past, when I've received one from some other, software vendor or whatever the case may be, it was very hard for me to see that I need to be worried about this particular patient or this particular outcome in this cohorts, because it's just kind of masked a bunch of like ASCII nastiness. But then now that we can produce really elegant R Markdown sort of documents, or Corto as it may be these days, I think we're going to see a lot of good impacts in the life sciences space. So that's what I'm thinking about. It's kind of like no ML, no AI, no big data. It's just regular old counting things and making good looking tables and figures. I think we're getting really good at that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on the interactive results that we can present. That, yeah, Shiny, of course, is a part of that, but also, like you said, we can do our Markdown, static HTML, but with interactive elements. And I think it's just getting some of these legacy processes to be aware that there is this new world out there where I don't have to give you a 100-page RTF output. I can give you something with a DT table and Plotly to quickly drill down on those patients and maybe a safety physician wants to look at. So really enjoy those insights there.
Cool.
I know we're a minute over the top of the hour. Do you have a few more minutes? You have to run.
I think I have to run.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Oh
no
no, I do.
worries.
My next meeting starts at 5 after. I have 4 minutes to give. I'm quite happy to give them.
Okay. Awesome. There was one Slido question that just came in was, thank you so much for doing this. What are your actual practices for making code handoffs as painless as possible?
That's an iterative answer, I think. Learning, like when I handed off something last time, how awful was the experience for the person who received my code? I always try to ask that question, and I always get an answer that there was a pain point. So it's not something I can solve once and for all, but I'm definitely still learning these days. Like when I wrote that map function, it was real ugly and it was not clear what it was doing. Something like that. So just asking people who see your code how they felt. The feelings journal. I love this idea of the feelings journal of reading code. Yeah.
Love that. There is a conversation happening now around like DevOps and data engineering in the chat, and I don't want to cut that short. So I want to let you know, Travis, it's okay for you to go to your meeting. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience. This has been awesome.
Of course, yeah. I'd love to hang out for 3 minutes and see what the data engineer or the analytics engineer. Are there analytics engineering fans on here? Is that a thing in this our community thus far?
Awesome. And and Travis, while we're talking about that, I'm sure people would love to know how to stay in touch with you too. If Twitter is best or LinkedIn, if you want to share that in the chat.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Yeah, I'll do that. It's my username is Travis Gerke at both. I'll try to find one and drop it in here so you can find me there. Yeah, probably Twitter I check more often, but it feels like the future of Twitter is uncertain these days. So who knows? I try to hedge my bets with LinkedIn. So here's my Twitter. You can find me there. And honestly, like I try to. On LinkedIn, I do this maybe more than on Twitter. I update my location fairly often, and sometimes I've seen people on my travels, like people in our community. Like recently, we were in Missoula, and we saw like Mara. Like I don't know anyone who's around. If you're like, oh, you're in my neighborhood, like hit me up, and maybe I don't know, like see real people in real life and not be so isolated. So that's cool.
It's great. I see Robert, who asked the question or started off the conversation in chat, had to drop, but the point was starting data science before DevOps and data engineering is really difficult because it puts the pressure on a data science team to take some of these things on. And I know, Libby, you said you'd love to chat more about this too, and Javier, you had some thoughts, so feel free to jump in too.
Well, we just, at least on my end, we just implemented our studio team, which feels like a huge win for us. But we have a fairly small, group of professionals that I would classify as having, data engineering skills or like the know-how. So I've had to get my hands dirty in a lot of different ways that I wasn't anticipating. And I mean, it's been good for growth because I'm way more comfortable in Linux, and like, you know, it sounds embarrassing, but setting up, you know, ODBC connections, setting up drivers, like things that I didn't think I'd have to get involved with, I'm suddenly doing. And it's been, you know, it's been rewarding, but there are challenges because I thought, you know, I'd come into this new company and like, you know, week 2, I'd be crunching out and deploying apps or, you know, RMD reports. And it just hasn't gone that way. I'm still very far from even productionizing like ML or AI in a meaningful way. So, you know, there's a lot of baby steps that I think, you know, you have to prepare yourself for if
I just responded in the chat. I have to jump off, but yeah, I totally agree, and I don't have a good solution. But I love that you made the comment. I hope you all solve it and let me know next time I join. I'll see you.
Sounds
all right,
good.
bye.
Thanks again, Travis.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I know Javier just
I think
froze.
my internet
I
went
thought
out.
it was me.
Sorry.
Oh, you're back. You're back.
No clue where I left off, but needless to say, yeah, I just think there's a lot of baby steps you need to take, like to set up a proper analytics engineering shop or data science shop, whatever you want to call it.
That's exactly where you left off. So that was perfect. So we heard your whole point too. Thank you.
Our
I
studio
know
has been super helpful. Your team is amazing. Like Tatsu, your software engineers. I mean, these people have really gone out of their way to help us troubleshoot, you know, weird nuances. So thank you.
that's awesome to hear. Thank you, Javier. I know there were a few other comments on this in the chat too, so feel free to raise your hand if you want to jump in or just unmute yourself.
I'd put a comment about how in my previous experience, I took it upon myself to prototype infrastructure for our studio and Shiny server at my org, and it definitely paid off where now we have obviously the enterprise products, but it opened people's eyes. And this is many years ago, like way long ago when Art Studio first came out. And Ethan was asking how did I get started, how did I get tasked with that? I literally took it upon myself. I was one of those where I'm too much of a renegade in some areas of thought, but I saw the potential of what ARC could bring in our org, and it had been used a little bit before, but only by a handful of people. And I thought these interfaces were enabling technology to those that would be interested in pursuing this. So with my Linux kind of side hobby of learning about Linux and doing that at home and running that server on my own home server here, I was able to get a virtual machine from our Linux team. They just said, have at it, just don't break anything. I'm like, yeah, sure, I won't break anything. And sure enough, it took off. So just had to get people buying into giving me the opportunity. And once I had the opportunity, it wasn't part of my day job by any means. Like I wasn't hired to do Linux administration, but I knew enough that if I could carve out a little bit of time here and there, I could at least get this started. And now I have great help with it. It's not on me anymore, but it does take somebody to take that initiative, and you kind of have to make time for it. And most of these big orgs, I would say, but once you do, the payoffs are tremendous, I think. So again, it helped that I'm a Linux geek at heart, so it was kind of in my wheelhouse. But it's much easier now to learn about the skills you need to do this than it was back in my day, to use a cliche.
Thanks so much, Eric. Brittany, I see you said you were an engineering analyst out of necessity, not your own choice, but what has been helpful for you in moving towards that?
Yeah, I think just learning to collaborate even across roles. I think a lot of what I had to do was collaborating with people who are what you'd call traditionally data engineers, but also just reaching out even beyond my company. I think also realizing that you might find yourself in this situation, even if you're in a larger company. Like I mentioned earlier, my team has 90 analysts alone, and I still found myself in the realm of like having to figure out getting data and cleaning it up and actual processes for that. So I think just like honestly leaning into those opportunities is also something I would highly recommend, because I didn't realize I'd like it until I started doing it. So
Thank you.
yeah.
I think we have covered all the questions. If there are certain things that we missed, feel free to raise your hand here too. I know Travis is gone, but all of you are leaders here as well and are qualified to answer some of these questions. I know we covered a ton of stuff there. Thank you all so much for joining today and for all the amazing questions too. Hopefully we'll see you all back next week. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.